South Africa is taking apartheid Israel to court for the crime of genocide. The outcome of this case can fundamentally shift world politics. But it is no coincidence that a country with a history of colonialism and apartheid is leading the support for Palestine.
Because just like ourselves, they are fighting for the right of self-determination.
So what can South Africa's journey of liberation teach us about how Palestine will one day become free? First, let us go back in time. South Africa was first colonized by Europeans in 1652 through the Dutch, and then the British in 1806. Over the 300 years of colonialism, the descendants of the first Dutch settlers, known as the Afrikaners, developed their own peoplehood, language, identity, and ideology. They believed they had a God-given right to settle South Africa.
For many white South Africans, this is still the land God gave them.
The Afrikaners took power in 1948 and instituted the regime of apartheid, which was a system that further entrenched racial segregation and hierarchy.
Whites-only notices seem more sinister than ever.
It classified people as being either white, Indian, colored, or black. Your race then determined where you could live, go, who you could marry, and what you could do for work.
You believe in apartheid as a way of life?
Yes, I do.
Why?
In South Africa.
Why is that, sir?
Because the race, which is in a lesser state of development, is by far in the majority here. And numerically, of course, they are much stronger. And because also I believe that it is according to God's will that the white race, which is in the majority in this country, should be preserved. And also everything we have done in the last 300 years, built up in the church and in the state, should be preserved.
In addition to this, the apartheid regime forcibly transferred the majority of the black African population into Bantustans, which made up 13% of the land, while the minority white population took 87% of the land. The Bantustans were impoverished and were designed as a source of control and cheap labor for white South Africa. And the only way you could leave was through a pass for work. The apartheid regime then appointed tribal chiefs to govern the Bantustans, to give the illusions of autonomy, but in fact they were just an extension of the system. Does this all sound familiar? The colonial apartheid regime was brutal in its oppression, and so naturally, it was met with resistance. Initially, the African National Congress adopted an approach of civil disobedience and non-violent resistance, but without much success. Things changed in 1960. 7,000 black South Africans went to the streets to protest the racist pass laws. They were met with violence from the South African police, who killed 69 people in cold blood, shooting them in the back, in what became known as the Sharpeville Massacre. This was a turning point. There was an understanding that this colonial violence could only be met with armed resistance. So a young leader in the ANC founded the MK, the armed wing of the ANC, and his name was Nelson Mandela.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks.
It was on this basis Nelson Mandela was later imprisoned for 27 years and regarded as a terrorist by the majority of the West. He was not taken off the US terror list until 2008. The South African struggle for liberation was built on 4 strategic pillars: armed operations, mass mobilization, underground organization, and international solidarity. The impact of these ebbed and flowed, as it was met with an apartheid regime that had superior military capabilities, a robust economy, nuclear weapons, and support from the West like the US and apartheid Israel. In the 1970s, the struggle was at a low point. Freedom did not seem imminent, until one day, the people rose up. In 1976, 20,000 students protested against the introduction of Afrikaans into their curriculum. And once again, South African police met them with violence and killed people in cold blood. The Soweto uprising reinvigorated the liberation movement and re-centered the anti-apartheid struggle on the world stage. Following almost 2 decades of guerrilla warfare, international sanctions on apartheid South Africa, and popular mobilization, the regime could no longer bear the cost and began to crumble. And after negotiations with the ANC, apartheid was dismantled, and a new constitution based on non-racialism was adopted, and the first elections were held, ushering in Nelson Mandela as president in 1994. And while political and legal apartheid was overthrown, people in South Africa are still struggling against economic and social apartheid today. While not identical, the parallels between South Africa and Palestine are many, and the history of solidarity between the two struggles against settler colonialism and apartheid for self-determination runs very long. We must remember, it took South Africa over 300 years to become free. It teaches us that struggle for liberation can be long, and any liberation strategy must be multi-dimensional, built on popular support, and cannot exclude armed resistance.
Choose peace rather than confrontation, except where we cannot move forward. Then, if the only alternative is violence, we will use violence.
The other critical lesson is that liberation can't come without international solidarity. It is enshrined in, none of us are free until we are all free. It is through this shared understanding and shared history that South Africa is suing Israel for the crime of genocide at the International Court of Justice. If the case is won, there will be a legal recognition that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians, and all countries are legally obliged to stop it. The ruling would also hold complicit countries that are aiding and abetting Israel's genocide, like the US, UK, and Germany, just to name a few. And remember, it was the US, UK, and Israel that stood by the apartheid South African regime until its final days, and with Palestine it will be no different. That's why this case is a blow to an international order led by the West, in which Israel has been able to colonize, kill, and erase Palestinians without accountability or justice. It furthers a historic moment of global awakening, in which it is clear that human rights, international law, and basic dignity doesn't seem to apply to everyone equally. But with a case like this, countries like South Africa are saying no more and challenging an international order that enables colonialism to this day. My name is Salem, and I tell stories that connect the unexpected. Follow for more, and support us on Patreon.